Good morning. This is for European History, Wednesday, the 18th of November, 2020. Where we were was comparing China and the West. The West and its absolute monarchs are using China and Japan as examples because the Chinese and Japanese emperors have what seems to be absolute unlimited power in their much more advanced societies. At this time, China and Japan are both more advanced than Europe in most ways. Not in terms of military or naval technology, but in almost every other way. Can you shut that window, please? So, the European monarchs see the total power, but open it up, please. Whenever you take an idea out of one culture and put it into another, it's going to change. It's going to be distorted. It's unavoidable. So, how do we deal with this? Well, let's look at the differences between God, glory, and gold. In the West, God is a personality, a monotheistic being who has a purpose for his creation, and we are accountable to him and his objective absolute morality. Glory is individual achievement, standing out from the people around you, succeeding by being better than others. Gold is a reward for glory. It's a reward for achievement. It is your personal property with which you can do what you want. Not so in China, which is the heart of East Asian cultures. In China, there is no unifying God concept. The most important person in Chinese history is not someone like Christ, a messianic figure, or Moses, a prophet. It's Confucius, who is a philosopher and an advisor to warlords. His philosophy is not a religion. It allows for traditional Chinese religion. It's feng shui, it's Taoism. It allows for Buddhism when it comes. It's not about faith. Confucianism is a philosophy of social harmony. It deals with people fitting into the environment that they're in, having relationships that are positive and that work, where people are in their hierarchy willingly taking part in those things that make their hierarchy work. It is bending like a willow branch, not standing like an oak against the storm and the wind. Glory is just that, carrying your family honor, like a person carrying a giant goldfish bowl, without spilling the water, damaging the fish, or cracking the bowl. Everything you do is judged publicly, mercilessly, and your family will suffer for any mistake that you make. Not just the living, but the dead. So, since you don't want to shame people in the afterlife or in this life, glory is fitting in and doing your role. It is making and smoothing all the relationships around you. It's the opposite of standing out. It's fitting in. Gold is a family resource. In East Asia, your name as an individual does not come first. The family name does. That's because you as an individual barely exist as a distinct being. In Confucian society, the family is the life form. You are a subset of that life form. As such, you're not acting for yourself. You're acting as an agent of your family. Everything you do reflects on them, and everything you earn goes to them. And the father of the family will make decisions on how that money will be spent. In the West, one assumes that if you have limited resources in your family, the children will get full rations of food, but not the adults, because you got to help those children grow up strong. That's your priority. In a Confucian society, the children may be the future, but right now they're less important. The father of the family and any other really important person in the family, they get priority because in this moment they have the ability to shape the family's destiny more than anyone else. So they have priority. They eat full meals while everyone else goes on short rations. Now, even the emperor has to fit in. The emperor is the son of heaven, and he has to maintain the mandate of heaven by harmoniously orienting China like a surfboard riding a wave. His head needs to be in the clouds, his feet on the ground, guiding the government. You lose the mandate of heaven, and natural disasters, disease, war, all sorts of disharmony happen. So you can tell when the mandate of heaven is lost, when all the peace and prosperity and positivity go bye-bye, and you end up with a year like 2020. And trust me, today's Communist Party that runs China, even though they've tried to murder the memory of Confucianism for the last 70 plus years, is desperately afraid because of all the natural disasters they've had. They've had massive flooding, they've had massive diseases spreading because of their incompetence and their willingness to treat everything like political problems. Well, disease is not a political problem. I wish more Americans would see that. Disease, disaster, disharmony, and the possibility of war, because they are literally antagonizing all of their enemies simultaneously. They're afraid that the people of China will see them as having lost the mandate of heaven. That's how deeply ingrained, for over 2,000 years, Confucianism was the way things were done. Now, in the West, look at what King Louis XIV and his immediate predecessors and successors do. Louis is the absolute archetype of absolutist monarchs. And he calls himself not the son of heaven, but Le Roi Soleil. I am the Sun King, around which everything orbits. I am the bright shining center of the French universe. It's about him. He says most famously, L'État c'est moi. I am the state. I am all that is France. And he identifies himself as an individual with the French nation. His legitimacy comes from the divine right of kings. It's not exactly the mandate of heaven. It's a simple system of hierarchy. God made the king to rule over man in his name. Therefore, disobedience to the king is disobedience to God. If God didn't want Louis XIV to be king of France, he would not have had Louis XIV become king of France. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a circular logic. But that's what Louis uses, and the other absolute monarchs too. So who runs the government? While all of this preening and pretense is going on in the West, and while all of this cosmic surfing is going on in the East? Well, the Chinese have probably the best system of meritocracy in human history. And for the better part of 2,000 years, it works. This meritocracy is the system of mandarins, or shi. These are Confucian literati. They are Confucian scholars. Anyone who's a young man, who's a boy, or a young man, anywhere in China, no matter how poor or obscure your parents are, can take an exam. Now that means the family has to pay for them to learn to read, to write, to count, and to read Confucius's and Mencius's basic works. But if they do well enough on the exam, they get hired as a government official, as a mandarin, as a shi of lowest rank. But still, you're working for the emperor. That's high status. It brings the family's face up. Family status up. And every time the mandarins want promotion, they have to take exams. It's pure meritocracy in the sense that it doesn't matter who you are. It matters how well you are at taking these exams. And these exams are not about agronomy or international economics or foreign relations. They are about Confucian philosophy. Because the assumption that is made by the Chinese Empire, and it's a darn good assumption, is that somebody who is smart enough to pick up the nuances of Confucian philosophy and how to apply it, which is what the mandarins are all about, is going to be capable of figuring out agronomy or foreign relations or international trade. Learning the details of specific practical matters is easy. Learning the nuances of philosophy and how to apply it, that's difficult. So the Chinese system is about how good you are at Confucian philosophy. And since philosophy is the study of consequences, thinking about what you're going to do before you do it, there is a wisdom to it. And Confucian philosophy, like any of the great philosophies or religions that guide the world, like Buddhism, like Christianity, like Islam, like Judaism, like communism, like liberal democracy. All of these ideologies have many different interpretations and many different variants, but there is a core that makes them Confucian or communist, legalist or liberal democratic. And so Confucian scholars have a broad variety of thought within a Confucian context. Okay, so that's a review of what we've done. How do you give the Emperor of China a unique lifestyle that will allow his head to be in the clouds and him to intuit the will and the ever changing balance of elemental powers in the universe? Well, what you do is you give that emperor a unique lifestyle. And that unique lifestyle is the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is a palace complex in Beijing that is an entire world. Thousands of troops, thousands of servants, over 1,000 eunuchs and women, including a harem or a series of wives for the emperor's pleasure. And the only man who lives in the Forbidden City after dark is the emperor. The soldiers are outside, the women are inside, the eunuchs are inside. Eunuchs are males that have had their maleness taken away through operations, surgery. Allows them to focus on serving the emperor more. And they're not going to sleep with the emperor's women. Eunuchs are a big deal in Asiatic monarchies, stretching as far west as the Ottoman Turks in Constantinople. That's in Europe. That practice was also followed in Renaissance Italy and after, where if you were a young boy and you had a beautiful voice, you'd become what is called castrati. Castrati are people, young boys who are castrated so that their childlike, beautiful voice is maintained through their adult years, but they lose their virility and their manliness through surgery. It's a hell of a price to pay for being able to sing for the rest of your life. The boy didn't make the decision. The family made the decision. So you have an entire city, which we're going to see later in a film clip, literally forbidden to everyone but the emperor. It is a unique world, giving the emperor a unique lifestyle, and that allows the emperor to breathe in the vapors that allow him to intuit the ever-changing nature of the elemental forces of creation. Louis XIV, Louis XIV of France, the ultimate absolute monarch, constructs Versailles. Versailles is a palace outside of Paris, about 19 miles southwest of Paris. Versailles is also a unique environment with a lifestyle like no other. Why? Because it shows the king's power. And it also will help the king domesticate his own nobility. It'll strengthen the king's ability to dominate and rule everyone else. Versailles culture is something that you will learn much more about. So, the emperor in China has the Forbidden City. The absolutist kings of France, from Louis XIV, have Versailles. Both are places that are like heaven on earth. They're designed to be utopian, like heaven on earth, to provide the ruler with a unique perspective on things. But remember, in the West, since you're taking it out of the context of Taoism and of geomancy and of all these other things that Chinese traditionally believe, it doesn't make much sense. It becomes much more about the vanity of the king and the desire of the king to conspicuously consume, to demonstrate his wealth and power, and to bankrupt the nobility. We'll talk about it. So, any questions before we go on into some other details about China that are just good to know? Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't think in the Forbidden City, but wasn't it kind of set up like now this is coming from something I recently watched, which is about castles and how they're completely designed to kill you.
Oh yeah,
Um, is it wasn't it really enforced that nobody could get into the Forbidden City? Like it
yeah.
was built like on the outside, like
Oh,
a
it's a
defense.
fortress. I know. There are concentric walls. There are guard towers. There are all sorts of things. No, the Forbidden City is a last ditch. It's designed to keep the Emperor separate from the people, and also to protect the Emperor in case there are riots. There's always a chance of riots in cities. So, yeah, that is true. Okay. Anything else?
Um, just because it's not on there, also Unix just they're spelled weirdly. I know because I read.
EUNUCHS is what I have.
Yeah, I spelled it wrong.
Yeah. Unix is how it's spelled. Okay. China calls itself Zhengguo, which this is in the old Wade Giles translation system. CHUNG space capital KUO. I believe in the pinyin it is ZHONGUO. But in any case, Zhengguo, what it means is central flowery or middle kingdom. In traditional pre-contact with Europe, East Asia, China is the sun around which the planets Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, and Thailand all orbit. Even Mongolia and the steppe nomads to the north are like asteroids or comets. China is the center. China is the source. Japan is basically using Tang Dynasty Chinese models for its clothing and its styles. Japan uses Chinese written language, although the symbols mean different things. The central flowery of culture, the central kingdom, the middle kingdom on earth. Um, China is self evidently, and this is so deeply ingrained in their philosophy, even today, the Chinese communists use this to stoke xenophobia and insularism, an isolationist attitude that says, of course, China's better than everywhere else. China's Middle Kingdom. It's Zhongguo. It's the central flowery of culture. Everything else is just barbaric. Barbarians may come and go, but Zhongguo is eternal. Now, how has China avoided having a dark age since legendary times of the Shang dynasty, where Shang Ti, the god of thunder and lightning and the sky, was the first legendary mythic emperor of China. How do they avoid having a dark age? Here's how. Because China is Zhongguo, the central flowery, the Middle Kingdom, they can get conquered by rude barbarians. The Sungnu, who became the Huns of the West, almost did it. The Mongols did conquer northern and southern China. Later, the Manchus, horse nomads from Manchuria in northeastern China, conquer the rest of China. And in all cases, these barbarians conquer China. They conquer the cities. They get to decide how China is going to be ruled. And Genghis Khan was suspicious of this. He knew what China was. Genghis Khan told his Mongol warriors, do not live in these cities. Live in your camp. Do not let them steal your manhood. Do not let them steal your anger, your virility, your fierceness. Because if you do, you'll turn from being a fierce wolf into a lap poodle. Don't do that. Stay in your camps. Go into the city when you want to rape someone. Go into the city when you want to steal something. Go into the city when you want to kill somebody. Work off some steam. But don't live there. His grandson lived like a Chinese emperor. His grandson Kublai was still Mongol in spirit, but in lifestyle, he had already been taken over by the Chinese. China is a sponge. The barbarians are like water. China absorbs them. To this day, there are descendants of every barbarian group that ever conquered parts of China who stayed there, married Chinese women, and ended up living like Chinese and becoming indistinguishable from the dominant racial group, the Han Chinese. Now, this notion of racial blending was encouraged by an amazing policy of the first sovereign emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi. When the Qin army conquered a region, they would often kill all the men and boys. Or if not kill them, then enslave them and keep them away from their women. Instead, and this is rough, so I warn you, this is a rough thing I'm about to tell you. What his army would then do is systematically rape every woman in the area for months. Not constantly, obviously, but every few days or every few weeks. His army would have every woman in the newly conquered area. Why? Think about this in terms of heritage, of breed, of genetics, of race and ethnicity. From this point on, every child is going to be part, whatever your original group was, part Han Chinese. Every child is mixed. And their children and their grandchildren and their grandchildren are going to become part of this homogenized ethnic group. It is a way of eliminating the distinctness of other cultures. This was never really done in Europe. But imagine that the French want to get rid of the Germans once and for all, and they're in a position of power. So they kill or enslave or keep away all the German men from their women, and then they stay in France, taking the women horribly and forcefully for months and months and months, so that the next generation of Frenchmen is not, or Germans is not really German. It's half German, half French, growing up under French rule, French culture. You see how that could eliminate the German race entirely, the German people, the German distinct national group, the ethnicity. So this happens in China. The Middle Kingdom, the Central Flowery, the dominance of the ethnic group, the Han Chinese, within this. This all happens early in their history. Now, there are two ways of translating Chinese. Bleh. The traditional way that we've seen in the West is called the Wade-Giles system. And the Wade-Giles system was developed by an Englishman who learned Chinese as a second language. It's also based on Southern Chinese, on Cantonese, the language spoken near Hong Kong, and near Macau before that, a Portuguese colony in southern China. After the communists took over, some of the things they did included destroying the old Chinese language of word characters and replacing it with a new simplified form. Everyone's old name was destroyed, and they were given a new simplified name. Everything was supposed to be easier, but what it really would do is make modern Chinese incapable of reading their own classics, those that might have survived the book burnings that happened during the Cultural Revolution. Out of this period comes a new translation system called the Pinyin. The Pinyin is developed by native Chinese speakers who learn English as a second language, and it's based on Northern Mandarin Chinese, not Southern Cantonese Chinese. If you want to tell the difference between Wade-Giles and Pinyin, Wade-Giles has a lot of TS's and hyphens and UOs. Pinyin has a lot of X's. Here are some examples. The worst mass murderer in human history in the Wade-Giles system is Mao Zedong. In the Pinyin, it's Mao Zedong. Slight difference in emphasis. In the old Wade-Giles, the Nationalist Party of China that fought the Civil War against the Communists and lost was called the Kuomintang, or KMT. In Wade-Giles, in Pinyin, it's Kuomintang, not Kuomintang, Kuomintang. In the Wade-Giles system, a river is Kiang. In the Pinyin, a river is Jiang. But generally, Pinyin has a lot of X's and Z's, and Wade Giles has a lot of TS's and hyphens. I think we'll say one more thing about China and Japan. In the early 1600s, the Jesuit missionaries that followed Matteo Ricci become senior advisors to the emperors in the late Ming Dynasty and in the early Qing Dynasty. The Qing Dynasty are Manchus that take over China. They're the ones with the very long hair and the haircuts that expose the front of the head as if they're all bald. Well, they're not. They have a lock that they can't cut. They make all Chinese live like this. The most powerful of the Manchu emperors is the Kangxi Emperor, who reigned in the early and mid-1600s. The Kangxi Emperor had Jesuits as his closest advisors, and he came this close to converting to Roman Catholicism, to Roman Catholic Christianity. Had the Emperor of China converted to Roman Catholic Christianity, the entire history of the world from the mid-1600s till now would be different. China would not have been an alien power. Remember, in the Middle Ages, the ante for joining Western civilization, the thing you have to pay up front, like to join a poker game, is to become Christian. Nobody's accepted until they become Christian. Christianity is the unifying theme of Western civilization. Then, and still now, despite what PC people want to try to do. As such, if China had become Christian, you would have had the largest Eastern civilization and the largest Western civilization suddenly have a great sympathy for one another. China would not have been seen as alien. China would not have closed itself off from the world. The only price was that, as son of heaven, the Kangxi Emperor expected to be the God's chief human, the vicar of God on earth. And then he was told who the Pope was. And the Kangxi Emperor graciously said, fine, I'll be your Pope. Well, the Roman Catholic Church was not ready to have a person who barely understood Christianity become their Pope from China. It was not going to happen. So the Catholic Church says, no, sorry, you can't be the Pope. To which the Kangxi Emperor says, fine, get out of here! And he closes China off to foreigners. China will close its doors to all foreigners except for occasional Portuguese contact for 200 years, from the middle 1600s to the middle 1800s, because he can't be the Pope. He doesn't want these foreign devils spreading their Christianity and their strange Western ideas, so he kicks them out, closes China off for 200 critical years. Now we go to Japan. Japan, in the very early 1600s, has just recovered from 100 years of hell. The 100 years of hell was caused by a series of civil wars. These civil wars involved three great dictators coming to the fore. In the early to mid-1500s, Oda Nobunaga became the dictator of central Japan. He conquered most of Japan and basically was acknowledged as supreme warlord for most of Japan, and he ended up dominating the emperor, because the emperor at this point is a religious figurehead. The military dictator runs Japan. So Nobunaga takes over, and then he's killed and replaced by Hideyoshi. Now, Hideyoshi is the mid to late 1500s, and Hideyoshi started life as a peasant. Hideyoshi rises through the ranks, becomes a general, and then takes over when Nobunaga is killed and becomes ruler of Japan, and he invades Korea to conquer the land of the garlic eaters. So Hideyoshi is the military dictator of Japan. The emperor basically lets him run things. And in return, the emperor gets to live his life as a god in a palace like the Forbidden City. But Hideyoshi dies in estate. He doesn't have any adult sons. He's got a little boy. So in the very late 1600s, there's a council of regents ruling Japan because Hideyoshi has just died, supposedly until little boy grows up and becomes the new Hideyoshi. Is that going to last? Are adult samurai men going to take orders from little boy guy? Not in Japan. So little boy goes bye-bye. And there's a great battle between the two dominant members of the Council of Regents. At the Battle of Sekigahara in the year 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu wins and becomes shogun, military ruler of Japan, in the emperor's name. Tokugawa is a first-class dictator, and he understands something. The Battle of Sekigahara was won with guns. It was not won with traditional samurai tactics. By the late 1600s, the European influence in Japan, which had been growing since the early to mid-1500s, had caused Japanese armies to import foreign muskets and small cannons, and then begin making their own. If you ever want to see a beautiful work of art of an early modern era musket, look for a Japanese-made musket from that period. Beautiful lacquered wood. They're works of art. But they're also effective military firearms. So the traditional upper class of Japan, the samurai, the Japanese knights who followed Bushido, the way of the warrior, they're going to be out of a job, just like Europe's knights became out of a job. And Tokugawa doesn't want this. In fact, he doesn't want ongoing struggles, and he doesn't want ongoing civil wars, and he doesn't want peasants becoming rulers. Tokugawa is old nobility, just as Nobunaga was. And so Tokugawa sets up what's called the Tokugawa shogunate, which lasts again from the early 1600s until the mid-1800s. And under Tokugawa, everything in Japan is turned to stasis. You basically have no social mobility. Lower class people found with weapons, they and their families and maybe their whole villages are killed. Everything is locked in, and the samurai become sort of poets as well as warriors. This is the age of Musashi, the ultimate samurai gentleman. And he sees the influence of Christians in Japan as a problem because they took sides in the Civil War. He doesn't want foreigners taking sides and dividing Japan. So Tokugawa, his son, actually says, we are casting out the Christians. And those Christians who were willing to leave were allowed to leave. And those Christians who refused to leave, and this included many Franciscan friars and Dominicans and Jesuits, were crucified en masse. From that point, Christianity was illegal. And any contact with the outside world, except for a Dutch ship that arrived in Nagasaki once a year, was forbidden. Any foreigners unfortunate enough to get caught in a storm near Japan and wash up on the shore is going to be fish bait, as the samurai will chop them into little bits. So both China and Japan literally closed themselves off from the outer world, saying the problems of others is not our concern. They will pay for that. It ended up being a disastrous move. We'll talk more about that next unit. So, for the rest of today, what we're going to do in class is see clips from the movie The Last Emperor. And you at home, I will try to have something for you to watch that will show you the Forbidden City. The Last Emperor was filmed in the 1980s, before the Tiananmen Square massacre, when China and the United States were allies against the Soviets. The Last Emperor was filmed in the Forbidden City. Not in a set, not on a stage, in the actual Forbidden City, restored for the sake of the movie to its imperial times. The clothing that they wore was based on the clothing left over from the Forbidden City era. You can't get more authentic than what you're about to see, and what hopefully you're about to see at home. So thank you for those of you at home. Bye-bye.